I just need a little money for the Christmas party, Dad, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt fragile, almost pathetic, a transparent plea cast into the cavernous silence of their indifference. It was a last-ditch effort, a desperate, fading glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they might see me, acknowledge me, extend a sliver of kindness. But his response, a guttural roar that ripped through the meticulously decorated living room, shattered any lingering illusions. "You're just a burden, Jenny. Nothing but a drain on us." The sound reverberated, a physical shockwave that seemed to rattle the very foundations of the sprawling, opulent house. It bounced off the antique heirlooms perched precariously on polished mahogany, echoed through the vast expanse of the high ceilings, and seemed to cling to the shimmering tinsel draped over the grand Christmas tree. Each echo was a fresh stab, a renewed affirmation of my insignificance. My mother, usually so quick to orchestrate the family's carefully crafted public image, stood frozen by the fireplace, her face a mask of practiced indifference, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames as if they held more interest than her own daughter. My brother, Julian, barely looked up from his gleaming new tablet, a casual snort escaping his lips as if my father's outburst were merely background noise, an annoying commercial interruption to his digital world. It was a tableau sickeningly familiar, a scene replayed countless times through the years, each rendition chipping away a little more of my already fragile soul. But this time, the words hit me, not just as an insult, but as a physical blow. Each syllable, burden, drain, us, was laced with a venom so potent it left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, burning its way down my throat. A burden. Me? The question screamed in my head, a raw, wounded cry that no one in that room would ever hear. I was the girl who had clawed her way through school on a patchwork quilt of scholarships and grants, each one a testament to sleepless nights hunched over textbooks, my eyes gritty from exhaustion, fueled by stale coffee, and a desperate, gnawing need to prove something. Anything. I was the one who never asked for a dime more than absolutely necessary, who mended her own clothes with clumsy stitches, who wore shoes until the soles wore thin. While Julian received a new car every 2 years and designer clothes without asking, I took on extra shifts at the greasy diner down the road, scrubbing sticky tables and enduring rude customers, just to afford the textbooks her peers received without a second thought, just to pay for bus fare, just to buy a cheap, worn coat to fend off the biting winter cold. I was the one who consistently tried, endlessly, thanklessly, to prove my worth, to be useful, to be loved. My heart, already a bruised and tender thing, sank further, a familiar crushing ache blooming in my chest, a phantom limb of all the ignored pleas, the dismissive glances, the way they looked through me, as if I were a ghost haunting their perfect, polished lives. The litany of their neglect flashed before my eyes, a montage of forgotten birthdays, absent parent-teacher conferences, and achievements met with a shrug. There was the district science fair, junior year, when I'd poured every ounce of my meagre resources and intellect into a project on sustainable energy. I'd won first place, bringing home a glittering, heavy trophy, my heart bursting with a foolish hope for their approval. My father, preoccupied with a golf tournament, had dismissed it as a distraction from more practical pursuits, while my mother had complained about the space the trophy took up on the mantelpiece, suggesting I store it in my room, out of sight. Then there was the winter my mother fell gravely ill with pneumonia. While Julian was conveniently away on a ski trip, I was the one who cancelled my own crucial midterms, risking my scholarships to nurse her. For weeks, I sat by her bedside, spoon-feeding her soup, administering medicine, enduring her endless complaints, and listening to her frail coughs. I slept on a worn armchair in her room, waking at the slightest stir. Her gratitude? A curt, almost grudging nod and a comment delivered in a weak voice. "It's about time you did something useful, Jenny. You're part of this family after all." The sting of that, after all, had lingered for days, a constant reminder of my perceived conditional existence. Every effort, Every sacrifice, every quiet victory, met with either disdain or a chilling, blank silence that spoke volumes. I was the inconvenient truth they preferred to ignore, the faint, persistent stain on their immaculate reputation, the constant reminder of a mistake they wish they could erase from their pristine family portrait. I remember staring at my father that night, truly seeing him for the first time, not as the formidable patriarch I had always striven to impress, but as a man who had perfected the art of emotional amputation. His eyes, usually cold and calculating behind expensive bifocals, now blazed with a raw fury that felt ancient, deeply ingrained, as if it had been simmering for years, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite. He wasn't just angry about the money for the Christmas party. He was profoundly, terrifyingly resentful. Resentful of my mere existence, of the space I occupied, of the oxygen I dared to breathe within the confines of his perfect world. In that moment, a painful, crystalline clarity pierced through the thick, suffocating fog of my chronic self-doubt and yearning. This wasn't about the Christmas party. This wasn't about money, or my supposed inability to contribute, or even my perceived failures. This was about me, and it was about them, and their profound, terrifying, almost pathological inability to see beyond their own warped perception, to acknowledge any value in me that didn't directly serve their image or their comfort. I was a glitch in their matrix, and they wanted me gone. That night, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a slow erosion anymore, a gradual wearing down of my spirit. It was a sudden, violent break, like a taut rope finally giving way under immense, relentless pressure. The years of quiet desperation, of hoping for a flicker of warmth, of believing that if I just tried harder, if I just became more of what they wanted, they would finally see me, acknowledge me, love me. All of it coalesced into a sharp, cold, unyielding resolve. Hope, that stubborn, persistent ember that had stubbornly glowed in the darkest corners of my heart, was, at long last, definitively extinguished. In its place, a fierce, protective fire ignited, cold and bright. I was tired of begging for scraps of affection. I was tired of being the convenient target of their disdain, the punching bag for their frustrations. Most of all, I was tired of being a burden. If that's what I was to them, then I would embrace it. I would become the burden they could never shake, even in my profound, unsettling absence. With hands that trembled only slightly, a ghost of the compliant, desperate girl I once was, I walked past them, their unseeing eyes fixed on anything but me. My father was already back to his newspaper, Julian engrossed in a game, my mother now adjusting an ornament on the tree, a picture of domestic tranquility. I ascended the grand staircase, each step a silent accusation, to my small, Spartan room at the very end of the hall. It was a room that felt more like a temporary lodging for an unwelcome guest than a permanent home for a daughter, stripped bare of any personal touches, devoid of the warmth that Julian's room enjoyed. I opened my ancient laptop, its fan whirring like a tired cicada, a pathetic sound compared to the hushed hum of their expensive electronics. With a single, decisive click, I bought a one-way plane ticket, somewhere far, far away, somewhere they would never think to look, somewhere they would never bother to look. The destination was less important than the act itself, a declaration of independence, signed with the invisible ink of my desperation. I packed a small bag. Not a suitcase, just a worn canvas backpack, its seams fraying, its fabric faded. Inside went a few changes of my oldest clothes, laundered and neatly folded, the meagre savings I had painstakingly accumulated from diner tips, tucked into a small zippered pouch, the dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre that had been my only true companion through lonely nights, its pages brittle with age and rereading, and a faded photograph of my grandmother, her eyes crinkling at the corners in a genuine smile, the only person in that house who had ever looked at me with genuine, unconditional love. As I moved, silent as a shadow, the house remained oblivious, steeped walked in its self-important quiet, unaware that its most inconvenient inhabitant was making her final exit. No one noticed the soft click of the latch on my bedroom door, the almost imperceptible scuff of my worn sneakers on the polished floorboards of the hallway, the faint whisper of the front door closing behind me, sealing their fate as much as it sealed mine. I vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the silence where I once stood, a profound, aching silence that would, in time, grow deafening to them, a void that would swallow their comfortable indifference whole. The cold night air hit me like a revelation, sharp and clean, washing away the suffocating stench of their indifference, of stale expectations and unfulfilled longing. I didn't look back. There was nothing to look back to. Just a house filled with people who had called me a burden, unaware that their callous words had just forged a weapon. I walked towards the bus stop, the city lights blurring through the unshed tears that pricked my eyes. Tears not of sorrow, but of fierce, defiant release. This wasn't an escape. It was a deployment, a declaration of war, not with violence, but with absence, with the crushing weight of what they would lose. They had dismissed me, they had broken me, and now, reborn from the ashes of their neglect, forged in the crucible of their disdain, I would show them the true cost of their callousness. The game had just begun, and they didn't even know they were playing. Their biggest regret was yet to come. The Greyhound bus station was a liminal space, a purgatory between the life I had just severed and the unknown future. It smelled of stale coffee, forgotten dreams, and the faint metallic tang of ozone from the ceaseless churn of traffic outside. Each harsh fluorescent light in the cavernous hall seemed to highlight the raw vulnerability I felt. A girl, barely 18, clutching the worn strap of my backpack, the single, pathetic token of my severance from a life that had never truly been mine. My one-way ticket to Chicago felt heavy in my pocket, a flimsy paper shield against the daunting reality of starting over. Chicago. It was just a name, a distant pinprick on a vast expanse of maps, but it represented everything my old life wasn't: anonymity, opportunity, a terrifyingly blank canvas upon which I was now forced to paint my own existence. The journey itself was a disorienting blur of roadside diners, their greasy aromas mingling with the exhaust fumes, and the fleeting, indistinguishable landscapes outside the scratched bus window. The rhythmic drone of the engine became a perverse lullaby, rocking me into a fitful, dreamless sleep, punctuated by the occasional jolt or the muffled conversations of strangers. I stared out, watching the familiar, oppressive contours of my home state recede into the rearview mirror, replaced by endless, monotonous fields. Then, the sprawling, unfamiliar geometry of new cities, each one a potential haven or a new hell. There was no wistfulness, no lingering attachment to what I had left behind, only a cold, hard resolve solidifying in my chest with every mile, a growing impermeability against the emotional wounds that had once festered. The tears I'd shed at the bus stop had been a final cleansing downpour, a shedding of the old Jenny, the timid, desperate burden. What was left was a sharper, harder core, fueled by a potent cocktail of hurt and defiance, a resolve to never again be seen as anything less than formidable. Arriving in Chicago was like stepping into another dimension entirely. The sheer, dizzying scale of the buildings, scraping the clouds with their arrogant height, the ceaseless, roaring thrum of traffic that sounded like a living beast, the kaleidoscope of faces rushing past, none of them familiar, none of them judging. It was liberation, a breath of air so fresh it burned my lungs. And it was terrifying, a vast, indifferent ocean where I was a single, insignificant drop. My immediate, primal instinct was survival. I found a cheap, dingy hostel near a subway station, paying week to week with the precious few $100s I had saved. The pervasive smell of mildew and desperation clung to the threadbare carpets and peeling wallpaper, a stark contrast to the sterile, pristine perfection of my former home. But here, at least, no one looked at me with contempt. Here, I was just another anonymous face in a sea of millions. I took any job I could get, my standards plummeting from academic ambition to basic human necessity. Days were spent as a cleaning lady in a downtown office building, pushing a heavy cart laden with cleaning supplies, scrubbing toilets until my arms ached, emptying overflowing wastebaskets filled with other people's discarded aspirations. The quiet, almost clinical hum of the empty offices at dawn and dusk was a stark, almost comforting contrast to the constant, judgmental noise of my childhood home. Nights were for a late shift cashier position at a brightly lit but soulless convenience store, enduring the weary faces of graveyard shift workers and the occasional late-night trouble from loiterers. My hands grew raw and chapped from harsh chemicals. My feet ached with a dull, throbbing pain that never truly left, and sleep became a precious, elusive commodity, stolen in short, exhausted bursts. But with every dollar earned, every blister on my heel, a profound sense of fierce, unshakable independence blossomed within me. This money was mine, earned by my sweat, my effort, my sacrifice. Not a handout, not a conditional loan, not a thinly veiled reminder of what I supposedly owed my family for the privilege of my existence. It was a tangible manifestation of my newfound freedom. Even as physical exhaustion became my constant companion, a heavy cloak I wore daily, the fire that had ignited within me on that cold Christmas night never dimmed. It burned steadily, a low, persistent flame that refused to be extinguished. I remembered my father's sneering remark about practical pursuits when I'd won the science fair, his dismissive wave of the hand as if my intellectual curiosity were a childish fancy. Practical pursuits? I would show him practical. I would show them all what a true burden could achieve when unleashed. During stolen moments on rattling bus rides, during my meagre lunch breaks hunched over a sandwich, I devoured books from the public library. Not just escapist novels, but dense, challenging textbooks on economics, on business strategy, on emerging technologies. I was a sponge, soaking up every piece of knowledge, every morsel of information I could lay my hands on. My analytical mind, once dismissed as a frivolous hobby, now became my most valuable, indeed, my only asset. It was during these self-directed studies that I stumbled upon the world of online courses, free lectures from prestigious universities made accessible to anyone with an internet connection and the drive to learn. I taught myself coding in a relatively obscure language that few people understood at the time, recognizing its nascent potential long before it became mainstream. The logic, the intricate problem-solving, the sheer act of creation involved in writing lines of code, it was intoxicating. It was a world where talent and ingenuity mattered, not lineage or social standing, where effort yielded tangible results, not dismissal or contempt. I'd spend hours late into the night hunched over a public library computer, the hum of the old machines a comforting soundtrack, typing away, lines of abstract code becoming lines of concrete opportunity. My fingers would fly across the keyboard, a silent, furious rebellion against every time I'd been told I wasn't smart enough, not good enough, not anything enough. One freezing winter night, after a particularly grueling shift cleaning offices, my eyes bloodshot with fatigue, I saw a crumpled flyer tacked to a community board. It was for a local startup pitch competition. The prize money was modest, barely enough to cover a month's rent, but the exposure, the chance to present an idea to be heard by people who might actually listen, it was more than a flicker. It was a beacon of possibility in the bleak landscape of my struggle. I had been quietly developing a concept, an advanced algorithm that could optimize supply chain logistics for small and medium-sized businesses, reducing waste, cutting costs, and dramatically increasing efficiency. It was a direct, pragmatic application of the sustainable energy research that had won me that forgotten science fair trophy all those years ago. I worked on the pitch like a woman possessed, fueled by instant noodles and sheer unadulterated audacity. I practiced in front of the cracked mirror in my dingy hostel room, refining every word, anticipating every conceivable question, my reflection a gaunt, determined stranger. The night of the competition, I stood on a small, makeshift stage in a crowded, stuffy community hall, the air thick with nervous energy and the scent of cheap coffee, a stark, liberating contrast to the gilded, silent halls of my childhood home. My voice, which had barely whispered a desperate request for Christmas money only a few years prior, now projected with a newfound confidence that surprised even myself, explaining complex technical concepts with a clarity and passion that resonated. I didn't win the grand prize. The top spot went to a team with a flashier, more consumer-facing app, but as I gathered my meagre notes, a quiet woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and an aura of understated power approached me. Her name was Anya Sharma, a venture capitalist with a formidable reputation for spotting unconventional talent, a woman known for seeing beyond the slick presentations to the raw potential beneath. "Your algorithm has potential, Jenny," she said, her voice calm and measured, devoid of the condescension I was so accustomed to. "Raw, yes. Unpolished, certainly, but undeniably innovative. More than that, though, I see something in you. A hunger, a drive, a quiet fire. That conversation changed everything. Anya didn't offer me a massive investment check immediately. She was far too shrewd for that. Instead, she offered something far more valuable: mentorship, a small, crucial seed fund to get me started, and, most importantly, access to her vast network of contacts. She didn't see the burden my family had so readily labelled me. She saw the fight in me, the same indomitable fight that had propelled me onto that bus. She saw potential, not problems. She saw a future, not a past. With Anya's backing, I moved out of the cramped hostel into a tiny shared apartment with other aspiring entrepreneurs, all of us equally broke but rich in ambition. We ate, slept and breathed our projects, sharing ideas and anxieties in equal measure. The small seed fund from Anya was just enough to secure a tiny, windowless office space in a burgeoning tech incubator, a shared hub where ideas were born and dreams, however audacious, were nurtured. I named my fledgling company Ascension Logistics. Ascension, rising. It wasn't just a business name, it was a promise to myself, a constant, silent vow. Years passed. The initial trickle of small successes became a steady stream, then a torrent. Years of relentless, bone-wearying work, of quiet determination, of building something substantial from absolute nothing. The setbacks were numerous, the moments of doubt crippling. There were countless nights I wanted to give up, to curl into a ball and disappear into the anonymity I had once craved. But then, like a cold splash of water, I would remember the roar, "You're just a burden," and the image of my mother's indifferent face, Julian's sneer, my father's contempt. That memory was a bitter elixir, a cold, potent fuel that reignited my resolve, driving me forward with renewed ferocity. I learned, I grew, I soared, not just professionally, but personally. I meticulously surrounded myself with people who believed in merit, not birthright, in innovation, not inherited wealth. My small team grew, attracting brilliant minds who shared my vision for efficiency and technological disruption. We built the algorithm, refined it countless times, tested it rigorously, poured our very essence into every line of code, every strategic decision. Ascension Logistics started small, optimizing delivery routes for local florists, then expanding to regional bakeries, then national distributors, then, eventually, multinational corporations. Our technology was disruptive, elegant, and incredibly effective, a silent revolution in the logistics industry. Word spread like wildfire through the tech and business communities. Investors who had once dismissed me as too young, too inexperienced, or lacking the pedigree, now came knocking, eager to get a piece of Ascension, eager to throw money at the burden they would never have recognized. I learned to navigate high-stakes boardrooms, to command attention with a mere glance, to negotiate multi-million-dollar deals with a steely resolve that belied my quiet beginnings. The girl who once whispered desperate requests for pocket money now spoke with authority, her voice clear, unwavering, and sharp with conviction. I transformed not just my circumstances, but myself, inside and out. The awkward, self-conscious Jenny, constantly seeking approval, was replaced by a confident, formidable businesswoman, her presence commanding, her intellect undeniable. But beneath the polished exterior, the designer suits, and the confident smile, the core remained. The burning fire, the unyielding drive, the quiet, insatiable desire for vindication. I never contacted them. Not a single call, not an email, not even an anonymous message through a third party. I cut them out, cleanly and surgically, from my life. They were a closed chapter, a painful but necessary part of my origin story, a wound that had healed into a scar, strong and unyielding. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they hadn't tried to find me either. The burden had lifted, and they were, no doubt, relieved, free to continue their lives unencumbered by my inconvenient presence. They had moved on, likely without second thought, basking in their perfected facade, and that, in itself, was a constant, sharp reminder of how little I had truly meant to them, how easily replaceable I was. But while I erased them from my present, I never, for a single moment, forgot their past actions. Every successful deal, every new client secured, every positive headline about Ascension logistics that rippled through the financial world was a silent, personal victory, a deliberate chip in the wall of their carefully constructed, self-satisfied world. I knew instinctively that one day, inevitably, our paths would cross again. The world, for all its vastness, was surprisingly small, and success, especially success of Ascension's magnitude, rarely remained hidden for long. And when that day came, it wouldn't be Jenny, the burden standing before them, begging for crumbs of affection. It would be Jenny, the architect of her own destiny, a force they had tragically underestimated, and whose profound absence would become their gravest, most unbearable regret. I waited, and I built. And then the day came when I saw their faces again, not in person, but in the glaring headlines, their shock palpable, a delicious vindication. The day I saw their faces again, not in person, but in the glaring headlines, was a Tuesday. I was in my sleek, minimalist office on the 40th floor of a Chicago skyscraper, the city sprawling beneath me like a glittering circuit board. My assistant, Lisa, a whip-smart graduate who embodied the ethos of Ascension logistics, placed a steaming mug of black coffee on my desk. "Good morning, Jenny," she chirped, before her expression shifted, her eyes widening as she glanced at the newsfeed on her tablet. "Oh, wow! Did you see this?" The headline screamed at me from the screen, a digital serpent coiling around my attention. "Financial Titan Richard Aris and Sons hit with massive lawsuit implications for empire." Richard Aris, my father. Aris and Sons, their company. My breath hitched, not in shock, but in a peculiar, almost disorienting sense of anticipation. It had been years since their faces had ceased to be anything more than faint, unpleasant memories. Years since I had consciously thought about them. So consumed was I with building my own empire. Yet, here they were, thrust back into my consciousness, not through a conscious act of mine, but by the relentless, impartial hand of fate. The article detailed a complex class action lawsuit against Aris and Sons, accusing them of gross negligence, unethical business practices, and a systematic disregard for environmental regulations. It was all laid bare. The shoddy construction projects, the corner cutting that led to structural failures, the quiet settlements that had, until now, kept their misdeeds out of the public eye. The facade of their meticulously crafted reputation was cracking, revealing the rot beneath. My father, in a grainy photo accompanying the article, looked older, his jaw set in a stubborn, almost desperate line. My mother, in another, looked pale and strained, her usual composed elegance replaced by a brittle anxiety. And Julian, ever the golden boy, was barely mentioned, a junior executive whose name was a footnote in the unfolding disaster. Their shock, even through a screen, was palpable. Their carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of inherited wealth and manufactured prestige, was crumbling. A strange, complex emotion stirred within me. It wasn't glee, not exactly. It was something colder, more detached, yet deeply satisfying. A silent vindication. They had called me a burden. They had cast me aside. And now, the very empire they had so jealously guarded was under siege, not by an external enemy, but by the very cracks they had ignored, the moral compromises they had so readily made. The irony was a bitter, delectable taste on my tongue. Over the next few weeks, I followed the news with a detached fascination, like observing a slow-motion car crash. The initial lawsuit was just the beginning. Investigations widened. More accusations surfaced. Their stock plummeted. Board members started resigning. Julian, the heir apparent, was suddenly facing public scrutiny, his privileged life dissected and found wanting. Their carefully curated social circle, once a fortress, began to visibly shrink. The whispers about their families' declining fortunes became audible murmurs in the elite circles I now occasionally brushed against. It was during this period that Anya called me into her office. Anya, my mentor, my first believer, had recently joined the board of Ascension Logistics, overseeing our rapid expansion. She looked at me, her sharp eyes twinkling with a knowing glint. "Jenny," she said, her voice low, "have you been following the news regarding Aris and Sons?" I nodded. "Casually, why?" Anya leaned forward, a slight smile playing on her lips. Because their lead logistics partner, a company called Global Nexus, just declared bankruptcy. Turns out, Aris and Sons relied on them almost exclusively for their vast supply chain. Global Nexus was reportedly using outdated, inefficient systems, causing massive delays and cost overruns that were quietly absorbed until now. With them gone, Aris and Sons has a monumental problem on their hands. Their entire operational backbone is crumbling. My mind, ever the analytical machine, immediately pieced it together. Global Nexus. I knew of them. An old-school behemoth resistant to change, operating on a legacy system I had actively worked to supersede. The kind of company Aris and Sons would sign a multi-year, ironclad contract with, precisely because it represented the status quo they valued over innovation. And now, that status quo was their undoing. "What does that mean for us?" I asked, my voice calm, but my pulse quickening. Anya's smile widened. "It means, Jenny, that Aris and Sons needs a logistics solution, and they need it yesterday. And Ascension Logistics is now arguably the best in the business. Our technology is light years ahead. We can integrate seamlessly, optimize their entire global supply chain in a way Global Nexus never could. It's a massive contract opportunity, Jenny, possibly the biggest in our history." The words hung in the air, loaded with more than just financial implications. This wasn't just a business deal. This was the universe offering me a poetic, delicious twist of fate. They, who had discarded me as a burden, were now teetering on the brink, and the one thing that could save them, their logistical lifeline, was my company. My company, built from the very grit and determination their neglect had forged. "What's your recommendation?" I asked Anya, my gaze steady. "My recommendation," she said, her eyes still holding that knowing glint, "is that you take the meeting, not your head of sales. They'll need to know they're dealing with the best. And you, Jenny, are the best." I considered it. The thought of facing them, of sitting across a boardroom table from the people who had shattered my young heart, was daunting. But the thought of refusing, of letting this opportunity for a full circle moment slip away, was unbearable. This wasn't just about business. It was about reclaiming my narrative. It was about showing them, not telling them, the true cost of their neglect. The meeting was arranged quickly, surprisingly so. Desperation, it seemed, was a powerful motivator. My father, Richard Aris, and my brother Julian would be present. My mother, bless her socialite heart, was conspicuously absent. The venue was their corporate headquarters, a building I had only ever driven past, never entered. It felt like walking into a time capsule, a museum of my past pain. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that commanded respect, every line sharp, every detail precise. My hair, once an unruly mop, was now styled into an elegant, formidable bob. My face, once soft and uncertain, was now composed, framed by glasses that lent an air of serious intellect. I carried a sleek, expensive briefcase, not the worn backpack of my escape. I was not the same Jenny who had begged for Christmas money. I was Jenny, CEO of Ascension Logistics. As I entered the opulent boardroom, the tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard Aris stood by the large window, his back to me, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. Julian sat at the polished mahogany table, nervously fiddling with a pen. He looked older too, and surprisingly harried. "Mr. Aris?" I said, my voice clear and calm, devoid of any tremor. "Thank you for taking this meeting." My father turned slowly, and his eyes, once so cold and dismissive, now held a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Confusion? Recognition? Regret? He stared at me, his gaze sweeping over my polished appearance, my confident stance. He opened his mouth, then closed it, a silent gasp escaping him. Julian, too, looked up, his eyes widening in disbelief, the pen clattering from his fingers. "Jenny," my father finally managed, his voice raspy, a ghost of his former roar. Is that really you?" "Yes, father," I replied, my tone perfectly even, betraying nothing of the internal storm that raged. "It is." The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. Their shock was palpable, a tangible wave hitting me. Their carefully constructed world, already crumbling from external pressures, now had a massive, unexpected crack right through its foundation. The burden they'd cast aside, the one they had dismissed without a second thought, was now not only a force to be reckoned with, but also potentially their only salvation. Julian cleared his throat, his face pale. You run Ascension Logistics?" he stammered, as if unable to reconcile the girl they knew with the woman before them. "I do," I confirmed, stepping further into the room, taking my place at the head of the table. "And I believe we have a proposal that can help you navigate your current, shall we say, logistical challenges." I laid out the Ascension Logistics presentation with surgical precision, detailing how our algorithm could untangle their supply chain chaos, reduce their massive losses, and rebuild their operational efficiency. I spoke about the future, about innovation, about the ruthless efficiency they desperately needed. I never once mentioned our shared past. I never alluded to their past cruelty. I presented the solution with the detached professionalism of a surgeon, analysing a disease that was rapidly consuming their patient. My father and Julian listened, their faces a mixture of awe, disbelief, and a dawning, terrible understanding. The reality of who I was and what I had become was hitting them with the force of a tidal wave. They wanted to talk, to explain, to apologise. I could see it in their eyes, in the way they shifted uneasily in their seats, in the tentative glances they exchanged. They thought they knew me, thought they understood the depths of my pain, the trajectory of my life. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was the true cost of their neglect. It wasn't just the absence of a daughter, it was the absence of the formidable ally I could have been, the innovative mind they had so carelessly discarded. It was the future they had lost with me, a future I had already begun to build, brick by painful brick, without them. And as they finally reached out, desperate for a second chance, for a lifeline that only I could provide, I allowed myself a small, internal smile, not a warm smile, not one of forgiveness or reconciliation, but one sharp enough to cut glass, edged with the cold gleam of victory. Because while they mourned the future they lost with me, I was just getting started on the future I'd already begun to build, and their biggest regret was yet to come. The silence in the boardroom after my presentation stretched, thick and suffocating, It was no longer the polite professional quiet that often followed a high-stakes pitch. It was the silence of men grappling with a profound, uncomfortable truth. My father, Richard Arris, and my brother Julian sat across from me, their faces a canvas of warring emotions. Awe at the sheer scale of Ascension's solution, disbelief that I was its architect, and a dawning, terrible understanding of the hand that now held their fate. Julian, ever the first to crack under pressure, fidgeted. "Jenny, this is remarkable. We had no idea you were doing anything like this." His voice was hushed, almost apologetic. He looked at me with an unfamiliar deference, as if seeing me for the first time, not as a younger sister to dismiss, but as a formidable, intimidating peer. My father, typically so composed, cleared his throat, his gaze lingering on me. "Jenny," he began, his tone a strained attempt at paternal warmth, We've often wondered what became of you after you left." The words hung in the air, a clumsy, belated olive branch. There was no apology for why I left, no acknowledgement of the years of pain, just a vague reference to my absence. I met his gaze, my expression unwavering. "My departure was quite clear, Father, as was my intention to build something of my own." My voice remained even, professional, betraying nothing of the churning coldness beneath. I had rehearsed this moment in the quiet hours of countless nights, steeling myself against any flicker of sentimentality. This was business. This was vindication. It was not a reunion. The negotiation that followed was brutal, clinical, and entirely on my terms. I left no room for sentimentality, no quarter for their pleas of family. My team, waiting in another room, provided constant support, feeding me data, projections, and strategic insights. I dissected every clause of the proposed contract, demanding terms that were aggressively favourable to Ascension Logistics. Their desperation was my leverage. Their past dismissals were my fuel. "The integration will be complex, Mr. Arris," I explained, leaning forward, my voice sharp. "Given the legacy systems and the scope of the problem, our fee structure reflects the urgency and the guaranteed results. We'll require a significant upfront retainer and an equity stake option." My father blanched. "An equity stake? Jenny, that's unprecedented for a logistics partner." "Unprecedented times call for unprecedented solutions, Father," I countered, the tile a deliberate, chilling reminder of our twisted dynamic. Global Nexus left you utterly exposed. Ascension Logistics is offering you not just a solution, but a lifeline, a robust, future-proof backbone for your entire operation. The value we bring outweighs any perceived precedent. Julian interjected. "But the lawsuit is already bleeding us dry. We don't have unlimited capital for a massive upfront." "Then you find it," I said simply, my gaze sweeping over their anxious faces. "The alternative, as I understand it, is total collapse. Our proposal offers not just efficiency, but stability. It's an investment in your survival, not just your logistics." The days blurred into intense discussions, punctuated by their increasingly desperate attempts to bridge the personal chasm. My mother, Eleanor, even showed up one afternoon, looking remarkably dishevelled beneath her expensive clothes. She tried to approach me after a session, her eyes brimming with what looked suspiciously like tears. "Jenny, my darling, we've missed you so much," she whispered, reaching for my arm. I smoothly sidestepped her, my voice low and firm. "Mrs. Arris, this is a professional engagement. Our legal teams are handling the details. There's nothing more to discuss on a personal level." Her hand dropped, her face crumpling. "But we're family. We can fix this." "Family," I repeated, a ghost of a smile touching my lips. "The word has a rather hollow ring, wouldn't you say?" I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the grand hallway, the weight of her sudden irrelevance crushing her. Julian, too, tried his hand. He caught me by the elevators, attempting a casual, brotherly approach. "Remember that old treehouse we built? Or how you always helped me with my math homework?" His voice was tinged with a desperate nostalgia. "I remember," I replied, my eyes cold. "I also remember the Christmas party where I was told I was nothing but a burden. Odd, isn't it? How some memories stick more vividly than others? I stepped into the elevator, leaving him stranded, his face a mixture of shock and dawning shame. Their regret was no longer a nascent ache. It was a gaping wound. They had seen the headlines, understood the financial devastation, but now, facing me, the living embodiment of their discarded future, they understood the true, immeasurable loss. They had squandered a brilliant mind, a tenacious spirit, an ally who would have moved mountains for them, had they ever given her an ounce of genuine care. And now, that ally was their ruthless negotiator, their cold, calculating saviour, demanding an exorbitant price. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they capitulated. The contract for Ascension Logistics to overhaul Aris and Sons' entire global supply chain was ready for signing. It was a behemoth of a document, meticulously crafted to protect Ascension's interests and leverage their current predicament. I held the pen, its cool metal a comforting weight in my hand. My father sat opposite me, his face drawn, Julian beside him, his eyes downcast. Just to be clear, my father said, his voice barely audible, the terms include the 15% equity stake in Aris and Sons, as well as the board seat for Ascension Logistics. That is correct, Mr. Aris, I confirmed, my voice crisp, and a non-compete clause for a period of 10 years, preventing Aris and Sons from developing or acquiring any in-house logistics solutions comparable to ours. He nodded slowly, defeat etched on every line of his face. And the clause regarding our future M&A activities? Any major merger or acquisition involving Aris and Sons would require a majority approval from your board, including Ascension Logistics' appointed director, to ensure synergy with our integrated systems, I stated, reciting the terms that were effectively a leash around their future. It was more than just a contract. It was a takeover in slow motion, disguised as a rescue. The 15% equity, while not a controlling stake, was significant, and the board seat gave me, or my designated representative, a direct voice and veto power in their most critical strategic decisions. The non-compete clause ensured their absolute, perpetual reliance on Ascension, and the M&A approval meant they couldn't even sell themselves off to escape, not without my express permission. They wouldn't just be paying me, they would be subtly, irrevocably becoming mine. I signed my name with a flourish, the pen gliding effortlessly across the page. Richard, Aris, and Julian signed after me, their movements slow, hesitant, as if signing their own death warrants. As the papers were exchanged, I allowed myself a brief, private moment of triumph. This was the twisted ending they deserved. They had cast me out, convinced they were shedding a burden. Instead, they had unwittingly created the very force that would, one day, control their destiny. I stood, gathering my briefcase. "Thank you for your cooperation," I said, my voice polite, distant. "Ascension Logistics looks forward to a productive partnership." My father looked up, his eyes now filled with a naked, desperate plea. "Jenny, can we talk? Just personally, after all this is done." I paused at the door, turning back to face them. My smile, when it came, was not warm, not forgiving. It was sharp, chillingly precise, the smile of a predator. "Father," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, cold as a winter storm, "you had your chance for a personal conversation many years ago. That opportunity, much like your company's independent future, is no longer available." I turned, leaving them sitting there amidst the ruins of their empire, their faces etched with the dawning, terrible realization that the true cost of their neglect was not just the daughter they had lost, but the very freedom they had once so casually flaunted. They had called me a burden. Now, I was not just their saviour, but their silent, invisible master. And as I walked out, stepping back into the exhilarating hum of my own ascendant world, I knew their biggest regret wasn't just losing me. It was that they could never truly escape me again.